Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security.
Hello, this is John Bicknell. Two quick notes before we begin today's discussion. First, the Information Professionals Association, in collaboration with the University of Maryland's Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence and Security, also known as ARLIS, are proud to co-host the Phoenix Challenge 2.0. And this year it will be a virtual event on April 13th. The Phoenix Challenge will be a one-day unclassified online event as a lead-in to U.S. Central Command's Worldwide I/O Conference, which will be held on April 14th and 15th. And there is still time to become a corporate sponsor of IPA, and corporate sponsors will enjoy unique access to Department of Defense and other government decision makers and policymakers, and will also have the opportunity to craft and possibly participate as a panel member or even leading a panel. To find out more information, there is a link in the show notes. Also, we are very interested to get some additional guests on the program who are national security thought leaders, scholars, and politicians. So if you know of somebody who fits that description and has something interesting to contribute to the discussion relative to information warfare and cognitive security, then please let us know. You can go to our website and email us, or you can contact me directly on LinkedIn. And now on to today's discussion. My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Mark Mitchell, who is a former senior executive in the Department of Defense who served most recently as the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict, and you may hear us refer to that as ASD SOLIC. Mark is a highly decorated U.S. Army Infantry and Special Forces combat veteran who served 28 years on active duty. He participated in multiple campaigns in the first Gulf War, Afghanistan, and Iraq. In 2012, Colonel Mitchell served in the Office of the Secretary of Defense as the Senior Military Assistant for SOLIC. His final assignment in uniform was on the National Security Council as the Director for Counterterrorism. Following his retirement from active duty, he worked as a business executive in the private sector. He also served as a National Security Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and non-resident fellow at the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point. He is also a board member and advisor to several nonprofit organizations dedicated to serving veterans and their families, including Warrior Ethos, Gold Star Teen Adventures, the Global Soft Foundation, and Special Operations Survivors. Mark Mitchell, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
John, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We had a colleague of yours, Mr. Peter Villano, on the podcast several weeks ago, and listeners may recall that Pete Villano was on the House Armed Services Committee as a professional staffer. And so Pete has had an interesting vantage for the last 10 years or so on the congressional side of things, looking at information-related challenges and how America is posturing, grappling with some of the challenges that we are dealing with today relative to the information problem. And you contrast that by having had an interesting perch from within Department of Defense and observing how the Department of Defense has been grappling with these same kinds of the evolving threat landscape over the last 10 years or so. Could you use that as a jumping off point to talk about what exactly the Office of special operations and low intensity conflict, or SOLIC, is within the Department of Defense, and how special operations and low intensity conflict has been evolving over the last 10 years. Just take that in whatever direction you'd like to go.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, so just a brief history. The Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Ops, Low Intensity Conflict, ASD SOLIC, was created in 1987, around the same time that the United States Special Operations Command was created. And it was created to be the civilian policy and service secretary-like responsibility for what I like to call the soft enterprise, the entire U.S. Special Operations Command and ASD SOLIC. And in that capacity, there's some of the shops that we have within SOLIC. We're the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Special Operations and Combating Terrorism, which underneath it has an Information Operations Policy shop. And then we had the Counter Narcotics and Global Threats. And then we had Stability and Humanitarian Affairs. And in addition, ASD SOLIC it provides the civilian oversight for the $13.6 billion soft budget. And so over the last couple decades, SOCOM, from 2001 to today, 2020, SOCOM grew from about 37,000 people to 75,000. And the budget grew from about $2 billion annually to now close to $14 billion. So tremendous growth. And when I first came into ASD SOLIC as a colonel, we were still really back in the 2011 timeframe, still very, very much into the counterterrorism strikes. And if you remember, in the Obama administration, President Obama had restricted that, and was very a lot of decisions were being made in Washington, D.C., specifically about high-value targets. Fast forward to today, our presence in Iraq and Afghanistan has changed dramatically, and Syria in the intervening years, and Yemen, Somalia, the Horn of Africa, and we also now have a new defense strategy in place as of 2017-18 timeframe that is focused, instead of on counterterrorism and counterinsurgency, on the potential for great power conflict and competition short of armed conflict. So anyway, that I think from my vantage point, the question is, we've got the world's greatest special operations forces, without a doubt. I mean, tremendously capable. But the focus has been on kinetic, direct action, as we say, in a very colloquial term, warheads on foreheads, and using lethal force. But now, as we step into this competition short of armed conflict, where we cannot, by definition, we're not using lethal force. The question is, do we have the right capabilities? And one of those areas where I think there are tremendous potential to increase our soft capabilities in the information operations realm. So I guess that's a quick overview of the role of ASD SOLIC, which sits in the Office of the Secretary of Defense.
You've got some meaningful things to say about your opinion on how things have been evolving and where things need to go. And I want to get to that in just a moment. But I want to start perhaps with getting your take on what are the kinds of things that we're doing right, or that we have done right, and what about what we do well do we need to retain while we continue to develop information-related capabilities and less kinetic capabilities. Can we start
Sure.
with a positive examination first? Yeah.
Well, like I said, in not only our special operations forces, but the United States Department of Defense is an exceptional organization from top to bottom, and we, the United States, as a nation, have built alliances and partnerships around the globe, and we've been a beacon for democracy and capitalism and freedom in general. And so when we contrast that with our competitors, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, even terrorist organizations, they don't have anything that can compare to that. And so I think the first thing I would say we have done right, built these relationships and these alliances because they're critically important in international relations. The special operations community, in particular, my alma mater, the Army Special Forces, pride themselves on being able to develop long-standing relationships with our partners and allies. And so I think that is something that we have done very well. And you look at the collapse of the Soviet Union and the aftermath in Eastern Europe, and the fact that all those countries that were formerly Soviet client states wanted to join NATO and be part of NATO in the United States. And we have our other partnerships and alliances in the Pacific, something that China doesn't have. I'm not aware of them. Aside from North Korea, I'm not sure that China has a military alliance with anybody. And Russia's in the same boat. So, I mean, when you look at what we've done right, those partnerships and alliances are critical. They provide the foundation, are part of the foundation for our global impact and influence. And I think we can build upon those. I also think there's just the people. Soft truth number one is that people are more important than hardware, and our armed forces it's really I'm not sure people outside the department realize the degree of talent and dedication and skill that we have in our people, and it's really remarkable. So we need to continue on that, but now we're at that point where some of the skills that we've had over the last 20, 30 years, are they the right ones that we need going forward? Do we need different types of people? I think the answer is yes. And there's lots to do there, but I really, our people and our alliances are things that we have done I think exceptionally well and really need to continue to build on.
Yeah, foot stomp for the alliances. And I would also suggest that our audience go back and listen to the podcast with General John Davis, who is on the cyber side of things, but he also very much encourages the United States to nurture and cherish and continue developing those relationships with our friends and allies. It's critical to this challenge that we face. All right. So, Mark, you have been immersed in the world of special operations, operationally in tactical units, and also in the Pentagon in leadership roles. Could you talk about the initiatives that you're aware of that have met with varying degrees of success, and how those are connected with cognitive security, the information environment, and the emerging peer competition that we find ourselves in?
Sure. I'd be happy to do that. There's a couple of things that come to mind very quickly, touching on your conversation with my good friend Pete Villano. Congress's attempts to get the department to take information operations more seriously and in a more structured manner. And they've created this position of the principal IO advisor, which again kind of is met with, I guess has not been met with enthusiasm. The department has created the office, but I don't really get the sense that they've empowered it. The other piece that, one of the efforts, the Global Engagement Center over at the Department of State, and Congress had given the Department of Defense the authority, but not the obligation to fund some of the initiatives at the Global Engagement Center. And we had the authority, the Secretary of Defense.
Sorry to interrupt, Mark.
Yeah.
The Global Engagement Center, could you remind us real quickly what
Sure.
the Global Engagement Center is? Thanks.
So the Global Engagement Center is a part of the Department of State, was created probably in around 2014, 2015, when they shut down their counterterrorism messaging effort. And the concept was to, again, engage audiences globally and outside of conflict zones that falls to the State Department, and then trying to take a more structured and a systematic approach to our engagement. It has had, I think it's the best thing I can say about the Global Engagement Center is that it has been challenged to be relevant within the Department of State. And so anyway, it's an effort there at the State Department, again, to use information to the advantage of the United States. So we had the opportunity to transfer the Secretary of Defense at his discretion could transfer up to $40 million. And in 2018, we provided $20 million to the Department of State Global Engagement Center. In 2019, the department declined to provide any additional funding. And so that's one of those areas where, again, there's opportunities for us to work together, but challenges in concepts and culture between the Department of State and DoD, and frankly, other priorities within DoD, because as I mentioned to you prior to the show, that $40 million was not extra money for the Department of Defense. It was money that the Secretary would take away from some organization within the Department of Defense and then give to the State Department. Which, as you might imagine, our defense appropriators on Capitol Hill didn't really like, because they don't do the State Department appropriations. And the other area, particularly in the information realm, was the Joint MISO WebOps Center. It's kind of, which we colloquially referred to as the JMWC. And the best way to describe this is a standing infrastructure that the geographic combatant commands could employ with their own, put their own people there to man this, to conduct, military information support operations, or, what we used to call PSYOPs, and other information activities to support their theater strategies, ongoing operations. And so US SOCOM is the host of that. So they are providing the physical infrastructure, the internet infrastructure, the communications networks, and then again, each combatant commander can utilize that to provide services in his or her, area of expertise or geographic area. And so, again, that's one of these, what I think is a great opportunity that really has not been fully embraced by the department because the department culturally continues to prioritize direct, kinetic, military operations, and look at information only as an afterthought to those, rather than looking in peacetime, when we can't use this kinetic force, as information as the primary weapon and being augmented by all the other things that we do to reinforce the themes and messages that we want to communicate. So I think those are three big areas within the information operations realm that have emerged over the last decade, but that have either not reached their full potential, or worse, have stagnated and will never reach their potential.
I want to linger on that last example, the Joint MISO WebOps Center that you brought up. Is that would you say that initiative is advancing? Has it stagnated? Where is that one at in particular?
I think it's advancing, but it's advancing very slowly. And it grew out of a concept, an actual effort that the Central Command had really seized and run with. And again, given the nature of what has been occurring in the Central Command area of responsibility for the last 20 years, you would expect them to have a tremendous amount of experience in this, and they did, and they built a capability. But what happened is some of the other combatant commanders said, "Hey, we'd like to do some of that too," and pretty soon, CENTCOM was hosting it, and it was like their position was, "Hey, we're not really supposed to be hosting this," so that's why it got transferred to SOCOM, and SOCOM does have the expertise in the psychological operations and MISO and the proponency, so it was a natural fit. But the combatant command's participation, because it requires contracting for linguists and other staff, they're not funded directly for that, and so they have to take it from other priorities. And so that has been a challenge. And they, when given the opportunity, the combatant commands, at least the 2019, chose more ISR over being able to fund the participation in the JMWC. So I think it has grown, but not nearly as rapidly as I think it should have.
The challenges that you're describing to me, it seems like there are always challenges to doing something new or to pivoting away from, say, in this case, kinetic and into a environment where kinetic operations are not unimportant. We need to retain those capabilities, but doing something new is it's not easy. And whatever it is that's new could be funded outright with money that is not going to be taking away from currently budgeted line items, or the services can be told we're going to be clawing money out of line items that have already been funded. And so either way, challenges are inevitable. But I guess this is kind of a lead up to, Mark Mitchell, if you were king for a day, what kinds of things would you do in order to position us appropriately for this great power competition that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, well, let me touch real briefly on the challenges of budget prioritization, and trying to find the right balance within the Department of Defense. Secretary Esper, when he was Sec Army, did what they called the Night Court to basically do a bottom-up review of priorities and programs to see if he could find more money without increasing the budget top line to fund modernization priorities. And when he became SecDef, he ran a similar process there. And all the services are going through it. You want to be able to modernize to stay as an effective warfighting organization, which is, as well known, the primary function of the Department of Defense. But on the other hand, I think the information operations sphere is probably the most, one of the least expensive areas within the Department of Defense. It doesn't cost a tremendous amount of money to put out information via all kinds of different mediums and to use it creatively. It takes some great people, takes some technology, but not a lot. And so I think but the challenge really comes in culturally within the Department of Defense. And a culture that sees is very comfortable with kinetic, direct, military operations, but that is much less comfortable and much less familiar with how to employ information. There are pockets of excellence within the department, but in large part, you find a lot of people saying, "Oh, it's too risky." And I mean, I've heard the complaint hundreds of times from guys in the field that it was easier to get a permission to drop a bomb on somebody than it was to tweet about them. And there, it may not be that simple, but there is a tremendous amount of resistance in the department to certain, to the idea of using information. And I mean, personally was told by, other senior officials, you're going to get us into a war by doing this. And I just said, no, I really don't think so. So how would I change the department? Well, I think there's some really, again, there's a great opportunity to really transform how we use information within a department. And let me just say too, for all my, erstwhile colleagues in the cyber realm, love you. You guys do great things, but cyber is a medium. It's not the message. And, information at heart is about the message, the medium to which, through which it is delivered, whether that's over the airwaves, radio, TV, print media, or some sort of, internet connection, is important, but it's less important than the actual message itself and how it's crafted, how it's reinforced. And so I think, if it was up to me, if I was king for a day, I would absolutely fully fund the GMWC and make sure that we're taking advantage of that. I would reinforce, try and find a way to not only work with the Global Engagement Center, but also the Agency for Global Media, AGM, which prior to a few years ago was known as the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and which has some of our most successful programs ever, Voice of America, and other radio and TV efforts, and try and better integrate across the Department of not only within the Department of Defense, but across the interagency. And I think to do that, the Department of Defense needs to rethink how it both plans and executes information operations at the departmental level. And it's just not good enough to have a meeting every couple of weeks. Information operations, the environment, it's a daily effort. It's a current operations, and the joint staff J39 that works, within the chairman, they're the portion of the joint staff that handles cyber and information operations. They're in the J37. they're not really best positioned because they don't interface with large parts of the department that are outside the geographic combatant commands. The services, Army, Navy, Air Force, the Marine Corps, and what we could, the fourth estate, as they call it, all of the, defense agencies that are, Defense Logistics Agency, Intelligence Agency, et cetera, National Security Agency, that are outside of the combatant commands and the services underneath the Secretary of Defense. So when I look at the department, I see all of that and believe that across the department, we should have clearly understood strategic messaging efforts that are centrally planned, decentralized execution. But we also need to change our that organization that's doing it. And it needs to be somebody who has direct access to the Secretary or the Deputy Secretary of Defense on a daily basis, and not simply the Office of Public Affairs. I mean, that's one part of it, but it needs to be an organization that has access to all of the super classified efforts, as well as the publicly accessible, to be able to integrate across the entire department. And that organization doesn't exist today. And I would certainly make that change. The other piece, I would put more emphasis on the intelligence needed to support this, and focus at least some part of our overall intelligence community on producing the products that are necessary for senior leaders to understand exactly how our adversaries are messaging. Not only disinformation, we've heard all kinds of discussion about that, but what are they saying that's truthful but shaped in a different way? And frankly, we just can't sit back and just simply respond to what we consider disinformation. We need to seize the information advantage that we have, both as Americans, as a Department of Defense, and actively message aggressively and put our adversaries on their back foot, responding to us rather than simply us responding to them. So I would create an organization, again, at the Office of Secretary of Defense level, that had the authority and the mission to monitor and to develop the strategy and direct operations across the department. It can be done with the right organization. It doesn't have to be like a huge bureaucracy, but it does need to be resourced, and it does need to have authority to speak on behalf of the Secretary to do these things. Otherwise, it'll never get anywhere.
So earlier you were critical of the Global Engagement Center and the way it has come into being and has started operating. The capability that you're describing for DoD, would it be an analog to the Global Engagement Center, except on the DoD side? Would you say that that's fair? Taking the most positive aspects of the vision of the Global Engagement Center, would you say that you're talking about something analogous on the DoD side?
Partly. I think, if you, and I have to say this, our vision of what the Global Engagement Center should be, or could or should be, may not always be consonant with what those in the Department of State see. But I do think a DoD component to that or counterpart would be very useful. And but again, we'll be focused internally, but also making sure that we coordinate with them. And I think the way the Global Engagement Center works today, at least when I left office last year, was they were working through contractors and giving out grants and contracts to local messengers. And it was very difficult to determine the effectiveness of those efforts, or in some cases, whether they had even been actually executed. And so
I'm sorry, but by local messengers, you mean contracting with individuals who are on the ground in whatever country that they are intending to message? Is that
yes?
Okay.
Yes, right. But whether it's a nonprofit or some other type of organization, and contractors that are working there. But again, it wasn't anything that they did directly. The Department of Defense efforts would be different because DoD does have a lot of capability and can message directly. This whole discussion, though, implicates another challenge of the way we are structured, in that currently, if you want to, if the Department of Defense wants to conduct a MISO effort in country X, it has to get permission of Ambassador X. And that model may have worked in the 40s and 50s, but today in a globalized information environment, it's very difficult to manage like that, and creates tremendous obstacles to timely and effective messaging. And so, so there's a lot of other issues that I have to kind of kick back to Capitol Hill and to the White House to resolve some of these. But I do think DoD still, irrespective of those issues, does need an organization that understands and can integrate across the entire department.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it also validates some of the comments in some other podcasts in what you were saying earlier as well, the value of partnerships and relationships, not only with our friends and allies, but also within our government. I commend to listeners to go back and listen to Colonel Brian Russell's discussion about partnering with intergovernment agencies in order to either maximize effects, coordinate effects, but cutting through that red tape that you were just describing as well. Do you see a role for liaison officers as well between governmental agencies, like State Department personnel residing within the capability that you were describing, and vice versa, or liaison officers even within Voice of America or the global media operations, and lubricating the gears, being a translator role between governmental agencies?
Absolutely. I think it's really important. And one of the things that we did when we gave the $20 million to the Global Engagement Center was, prior to that, we established a memorandum of agreement with the Department of State that laid out kind of the conditions of that we placed on the money. And part of that was the ability to have DoD personnel in the Global Engagement Center working side by side with our State Department colleagues. And I would absolutely welcome having some of them in a DoD organization, and same for the Agency for Global Media. I mean, they have a tremendous capability, and they are messaging on behalf of the United States government, and it should be messaging in support of our overall strategic goals. And so, it's mind-boggling that we don't work together as closely as we could or should. And I would absolutely support liaison officers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me too. Well, I'd like to wrap up by asking you if you could recommend to our audience some additional online resources. And by the way, we'll have links to many of the items that Mark has been talking about here in the show notes. But are there any books or other online materials that you can think of that our audience can check out if they would like to immerse themselves a little further in these types of ideas?
Yeah, I'd like to offer two books by my good friend, James Farwell, who is a very experienced, not only a political campaign consultant, but also just overall has experience within the Department of Defense and strategic communications. He wrote a great book called The Art of Strategic Persuasion and Power, The Art of Strategic Communication. And I think that's a really good foundation for understanding what can be achieved with excellent, well-crafted strategic communications. And then he most recently published through the Marine Corps Press a book called Information Warfare: Forging Communication Strategies for 21st Century Operational Environments. This book is probably the finest practical strategic communications information operations manual that I've seen, and I think it'd be great. I do think it's hard to find, but if you check out the Marine Corps University Press, and even if they don't have the hard copies, you may be able to purchase or download a PDF of it. But both are great books for understanding networks. And I would also go back to, you may want to dig out John Arquilla, some of the stuff that John Arquilla and Dave Rohnfeldt wrote while at RAND in the 90s, Net War, and some of their other works. Dr. Arquilla was my thesis advisor at the Naval Postgraduate School, a true visionary in terms of seeing the power of networks and of communications and information. And so, again, I think they've stood the test of time. So those are a couple of resources that I would commend to your audience.
Mark Mitchell, thank you so much for being part of the Cognitive Crucible.
John, thank you very much. Really appreciate both the opportunity to join you today and all the great work and the ideas and the intellectual discussion that the Cognitive Crucible is pursuing. And I wish you all the best of luck.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.